Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with Logos Media's episode number 121 with Caleb Thomas. We have a great show lined up tonight. Goodness, my camera's off center there. Sorry about that. Anyway, we have a great show tonight. We're going to be discussing methods for debunking pseudoscience and scientific inversion. And so we've got some pretty heavy material. Caleb has some great research on what gravity is probably the most likely and not this stuff that we've been fed, the Newtonian gravity, et cetera, that we've been fed for the last 200-300 years, et cetera. We're also going to be discussing the rational scientific method. This isn't the scientific method, which should be called the pseudoscientific method. It's more along the lines of rationality and basing things off of reality first and foremost. And years ago, I had David Harriman on debunking things like quantum physics. I recommend people check that out. This is kind of in line with the Royal Society series that my wife Holly and I have been doing over the last couple of months. So this will follow up with that, sort of just an add-in. And I think next week Holly may be back and we'll be doing the part 4 on the Royal Society. So that'll be fun. And thanks everyone for your support and donations during the week. Also, for those who would like, you may send, if I can find it here, goodness. If you would like to send donations to, what was your email address again there, Caleb?
The address is mick.caleb@gmail.com.
And so those of you who would like to send donations directly to Caleb for all of his research and efforts, and he's sort of like myself and Mark and some of us others, Jacob, etc. We all just do our research independently, and we really appreciate all of your help and support. I just unplugged my headphones. All of your help and support with this stuff, just the books alone, like on the Salem Project. We spent hundreds and hundreds on the books. But Caleb, welcome back to the show. It's good to have you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Always good to be here.
And of course, for those of you who've caught it, we launched a new series, which Caleb is a part of with Mark Warhol and Stephen Sorensen and other guests, the Logos Roundtable. You can find that. I may end up putting a separate website up for that, but you can get to the page quickly by just going to logosroundtable.com, and it'll pull it right up for you on the Logos Media website without trying to hunt around for it. So, Caleb, where should we begin? Why don't we start off by discussing a little bit of, we can first discuss the trivium and then, and its relation to the rational scientific method as compared to the pseudoscientific method.
Perfect. Yeah. So what really got me interested in the rational scientific method to begin with was how similar it really was to the trivium. It's really all about starting with the grammar, and it's very important because when you go through these concepts in your mind and you're trying to rationalize them within your own thinking, it's important to have a method. And the method that I have found, maybe there's a better method out there. Maybe we can refine this method a little bit more. We can always get better and better. But as far as I know, right now, this is the best way that I know of to really organize things and put them in their rightful place and start from the very beginning in a rational state of mind, as opposed to going through these vast amounts of theories that are out there in science without any filter, without any starting place. And that's kind of how we've gotten to the place we are now in what we call science today, which is really, like I said before, seance. It's more of a magic show. You call them mathematicians instead of actual scientists. These people are running around chasing their tails in a dark room, looking for particles and quarks and black holes and things that I don't believe exist. So
they're banging the black hole. That's the big joke. They always use these dark jokes with their inversion tactics. the dark age, the black hole, dark matter. That's when you know it's left-hand nonsense, usually right off the bat. I just wanted to say thanks, Polygonal Construction, for the $5 donation just now. Also, Eric Reddington posted the scientific method, analytical, rational, a priori explanations in lieu of experimental investigation. See Bill Gatey?
Yeah, Bill Gatey. That's a name drop. That's who I pretty much have gotten a lot of this material from. Him and a lot of the other guys in the community of the rational scientific method. There's just to give credit to these guys, they got a Facebook group, RSM. This is where I learned a lot of the stuff that I have. The material I'm reading from is some of it is from the vast amount of presentations that I've seen that they're doing. They're actually doing rational scientific method presentations. And they got some pretty big names over there like Stephen Carruthers. If you haven't heard of him, look him up. There's also a guy, Mike Huttner, who I learn a lot from. He's got a YouTube channel with great content, debunking the Higgs boson and just debunking mathematical physics in general. He's great. There's a bunch more guys that I can mention, but yeah, definitely start with those guys. And Bill Gatey's got a great website. I think it's still up, called youstupidrelativist.com.
So before you go on here, I just wanted to show the audience something, because this is really apropos for today's show. Red Ice apparently recently interviewed Rupert Sheldrake, or it's showing up in my feed, but look at this. So, I mean, Rupert Sheldrake, he faked all the TEDx stuff with Graham Hancock, but it's just ironic that right here at the bottom of the page here is Rupert Sheldrake right there, and he's one of the guys from the Royal Society that we've been exposing, and I've been meaning to talk about him in an upcoming show here. So it's just kind of ironic that that would pop up in the feed as we're preparing to discuss this stuff. Oh, sorry, that was published by Red Ice in January 2013. So odd that they threw that into our feed today from 5.5 years ago.
Yeah, I would assume that since then Red Ice has figured out that Sheldrake was kind of more of a new age pseudoscientist per se, more than you could call him an actual scientist. I remember him being very popular in the New Age. A lot of the New Agers use his so-called experiments that they watch his experiments on a YouTube, where he's got a parrot, with its owner, and they separate the parrot from its owner, and they put them in two separate rooms, and supposedly they're getting she's sending telepathical images to the parrot and whatnot. And who knows, but as far as science goes, I would just, on that note, I would implore people to use their head and think. When you think rationally and when you learn this rational scientific method, you'll begin to learn how important it is to do the experiment yourself before you actually start promoting the experiment as true or correct or any of these things. Experience is a very important thing, and primary documents, primary sources, primary experience is always important. So don't let the magicians get over on you by pulling a rabbit out of their hat, and showing you with their little parlor tricks. It'll save you a lot of time.
All right. So, first off, I guess, since I'm the one who released the Trivium Method with Gino Dinning back in 2009, maybe I should talk about that a little bit. But,
yes, please.
The overall premise is pretty simple. Basically, you start off with grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which breaks down to who, what, where, when is grammar. Or no, who, what, where, when. Who, what, where, and when. Yeah, that's grammar. Why is logic, and how is rhetoric. And then the who, what, where, when under grammar, that's what we call our knowledge, what we're working with. The why is our understanding of information, using logic to remove any contradictions from the knowledge aspect and just understanding it without any contradictions. And then the rhetoric or the how aspect is how we explain that we derive the conclusions to others. Now, if they don't want to follow through on the simple steps that you lay out to provide them to verify something, then they, can choose not to, but it's a simple method that when you use it, anybody else should be able to follow through the steps that you followed and verify the exact same thing and come to the same conclusion every time. Now, if they find an error, they can point it out to you. You missed this piece of grammar here, or that changed this little bit of logic, and then therefore the conclusion is this. But then, then they should be able to support their own conclusion with that, with that same method and be able to walk you through step by step. So what the trivium method is it's a systematic method for deriving certainty with any information, any incoming information, any outgoing information. It's also a way to verify the thoughts in your mind to make sure that the stuff floating in your head isn't, just fallacious logic that isn't verified. So, we have some pretty good comments in the chat today too. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to read all of these, but Eric says there is pseudoscience relative to fundamental philosophical criterion that, like falsification, and there is mathemagics. Yep, in fact, Disney years ago did a Donald Duck show called Mathemagic Land, and you can see it all there. But what people, especially that get caught up into the quantum physics nonsense and all this, are people that believe that math is the language of God or whatever. What they don't realize is that the map is not the territory, or the math is not the territory, and they lose sight that what they're calculating without logic, without a foundation of the trivium, they just put out a bunch of nonsense, and it sounds good. The math is correct, so therefore the math is the territory. But they don't even understand that that what they're putting out there doesn't jive with reality and what the truth is. So then post Kant, as David Harriman exposed, they just throw out the reality or the real world altogether, and then make up arguments that it doesn't even exist. Like, how can you make an argument if you're not sitting in reality first and foremost, right? And then they come up with concepts like, primacy of consciousness. I'm not in the world. The world is a reflection of me. So then it's the most egoic thing that they can possibly come up with, where they are suddenly God and everybody is a reflection of them. Nobody has a right to think their own thoughts or anything. And I remember in my 30s, I suppose, I believed such nonsense. And then as you dig deeper into all of this, you begin to understand that, these are tricks that people use to mind control us and to fool us.
Yes, exactly. Yes. There's a good question in the chat from Red Pill University. He's asking, what do you guys think of Walter Russell, Robert Otte, and Matt Presti? I'd like to get to that at some point. I will say for this particular show, I don't think I'll have time to go into the particular theories that I have and that I follow more of the what is scientifically. This is kind of more of a let's get through some of the stuff that we can debunk, because that's really what the trivium and the rational scientific method, where it shines, is you have a hard time figuring out exactly what truth is in science. That's why you replace the word truth with rational, and when you have to take a step back, because it's such a big, gigantic field, and everybody's just kind of listening to what everybody else says and looking at all these different possibilities out there. We need a way to narrow down the contradictions, and that's the where I like to start. I like to start with not necessarily what is, but we can actually start narrowing down all the contradictions to find out what isn't, and then we can have a much better idea of what is. And as far as when you asked about Walter Russell, just briefly, I'll mention that I definitely like Walter Russell's theories and hypothesis. I definitely believe that he needs a lot of revision, and I've been working on that, so I'll release that at some point. Robert Otte is working on that. I really like Robert Otte, and I get a lot of my information from him. He's a close friend, and he's a great guy. But on is that's what that is as far as that goes. As far as getting back to the rational scientific method, which actually coincidentally Robert Otte, I believe he turned me on to him to begin with, but Bill Gates' work. So the rational scientific method is what we're going to be using one of the tools that we're going to be using very similarly to how we use the trivium when we go through everything else. But the rational scientific method helps in this specific area of what we would call science, particularly physics, because physics is the study of physical objects. So it becomes very important not to mix philosophy into some of the physics and confuse the two of them. It's very important to make sure that we define our key terms, and that's what we'll do. We'll define some of these terms rationally, and when I say rational, we'll also define rational. I'll read a little bit of the note that he's got on the screen right now. For people who want to dive deeper into this stuff, we will provide a lot of notes. Maybe I'll.
Yeah, and there's links to some of this in the down there below the show description.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Okay, so just briefly, just so people kind of understand what I mean when I say the rational scientific method and what is rational. One of my friends, Mike Huttner, said it better than I can say it, so I'll read what he wrote. Science is the discipline of proving rational explanations for events in reality. All events in reality involve things, objects, forms, shapes, entities, and their interactions depend on the shape of those objects. Okay, and we define an object as that which has shape and location. That means you can point to it. It's something that we can both agree on because we can sense it. Rational is a term synonymous with meaningful or understandable. Rational does not mean true or proven or logical or anything like that. Rational just means that a communication is meaningful and not contradictory.
Right, and okay? It comes from my understanding from the word ratio.
Exactly, and ratio is a very important term that we'll get into maybe a little bit later when we start talking about math and how numbers are not nearly as important as ratios. Okay, so how this type of communication is accomplished essentially boils down to, can your statement be visualized? Science explains events rationally, and all events are mediated by objects. Since all objects have shape, all events can be modeled or illustrated. The forms speak for themselves. Visualization is a universally understandable language. So a rational statement is meaningful by virtue of the fact that you can make an image or a movie out of as an object reference for your statement. It doesn't mean true or false or good or bad. It just means we can all interpret it the same way. Okay, so that brings up the point that it's what's important is a communication between people. Okay, we have to understand what we're communicating, and so many people use different. They visualize something different in their head, and have different definitions for the same things, especially when you're having an argument or a disagreement. Most of the time people are talking about different things, so it's very important to first define our key terms. So let me see here. I got some key terms I'll go over real quick here. All right, so this is from Bill Gates, I believe. Okay, so physics, first and foremost, is the study of objects. You cannot do physics without an object. Okay, physical object. What would there be to study? What experiment could you perform in the lab without one? Specifically, physics studies objects that exist, and it's important that we define exist. So these are the parameters I'm laying out, so people do not get confused about what I'm saying when I give out some of the theories in the future. An object is that which has shape. Space is that which does not. An object is that which has dimensions. Space is that which does not. The word object and space are antonyms. Okay? A concept is a relation between two or more objects. The definition of the word object precedes the definition of the word concept. The quick way to determine whether a word in the dictionary is a concept or an object is by determining whether it represents that which has shape. If it does not, then the word is a concept. An object is inherently continuous. For the purposes of science, it is regarded to be made of a single piece. We can only point and name objects. Anything beyond this converts the object into a concept, which is reification. We are now referring not to the object, but to the relation of the object with respect to something else. We refer to the space separating the surfaces of any two objects as distance. The distance of physics is not the same as distance traveled of mathematics. Keep in mind, side note here, keep in mind, mathematics is a language that man made up in order to try to quantify things. It's not meant to use to be qualified in other things, just like Jan was just talking about with the map, not the territory. Location consists of the set of distances from one object to the remaining ones in the system. Okay, so let's define exist. Exist is a word circumscribed to objects. An object exists if it has location. The aggregate of all objects that exist is what we call matter. That's what we call it. Doesn't necessarily mean we need to define matter as well. An object that doesn't exist is known as an abstract or imaginary object. For the purposes of science, concepts do not exist and cannot be said to exist. They lack the two necessary attributes, shape and location. This existence of concepts is confined exclusively to ordinary speech. Okay, we can also get into philosophy later if we want to, start talking about defining things outside of this realm which we're in right now, which is physics. In science, it is irrational to say love exists, for example. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that love doesn't exist per se. However, love is a great example. Just a side little tangent. Love is a great example of something that is very hard to say, to get a very rigorous definition of, because everybody has a different definition of it. And there is no rational definition of love, because love isn't an actual thing that everybody experiences the exact same way. It's not, and it doesn't have shape and it doesn't have location. Just so you start to think in terms of the way science needs to be structured, because science is about explaining phenomena that we observe. Okay, and it's important that we have science, but it's also important that we don't use it to as a replacement for religion, and start kind of going off on these 100-year tangents of irrational theories like we've gotten ourselves into right now today.
Correct.
So just real quick, I'm almost done with these. Motion, it's very important for people to understand what motion is, okay? Because when you're talking about science, you usually go lower and lower and lower to the microcosm, and as well as macrocosm, and you're trying to figure out how everything works. We're trying to explain this phenomenon, and motion is one of the most important things, because motion is involved in other really important definitions that are so irrational that we have right now, like time, dimension, etc. Motion involves two or more locations of an object. Okay, it's like having, if you have a picture of an object, that's not motion, right? But if you have two pictures of an object and it goes from one place to another, then then you can say that involves motion. Motion is a property circumscribed to objects that exist. Concepts and imaginary objects do not have the ability to move. Okay, a scientific theory requires a hypothesis, a theory, and a conclusion. Okay, that's important because half of the theories out there that we talk about aren't actually even theories. Most of them are just in the hypothesis stage. And so many people are running around. I mean, plate tectonics theory is not a theory; it's a hypothesis. It's an interesting hypothesis. It's probably a false hypothesis, in my opinion, but you can't move along to a theory. We'll get into that. A hypothesis is comprised of three steps or stages: the exhibits, the definitions, and the statement of the facts. Okay. Okay. The exhibits phase of the scientific method involves the presentation of the objects that are to play a relevant role in the theory. Okay. This is important because when you go back and you start looking into all these theories, this is how you define a theory. If it's not this, then it's definitely not a rational theory. So I'm trying to give you guys ammunition out for those of you out there who are looking to, get into more scientific discussions with people, even though it's hard because they have a limited hangout and they have their own lingo, they have their own peer review and stuff. But if you get into conversations with some of these people, you'll actually be able to flow with them, and you'll be able to let them you'll be able to ask them questions that you can then just watch as they crumble. Okay, so a definition is a set of limitations or restrictions placed on a word. Okay, so a definition is what we're using in the trivium, we're using in the rational scientific method as our main way of condensing all this huge amount of material and filtering it and limiting it down into a more digestible, more rational thing that we can all agree on, as opposed to the opposite. And object, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, except for those who aren't rational, they'll dismiss the facts, period.
Yes, and this is hopefully going to give people ammunition to show, hey, if you're not rational, why are we even moving on to the next thing? Are we gonna sit here and argue over a whole bunch of irrational concepts that have absolutely no basis in reality? No, let's start somewhere. And hopefully, you guys, once you get good at the trivium, and hopefully the rational scientific method interests you, you'll be able to you won't just get bombarded with all these irrational things that they use to try to shock and awe people like Michio Kaku and other like Bill Nye and stuff, who they use these big words and they use these mathematical equations to hope they can dazzle you into just going, oh, okay, he sounds smart.
I don't know if I've ever ever seen anybody on the media, on the legacy media, is irrational and full of crap as Bill Nye. And that's just my personal opinion for the lawyers out there. But, wow, this guy is just, in my humble opinion, a clown.
Yeah, side note for Bill Nye real quick, just a small tangent. So Bill Nye is a actor. He has, I think he has an engineering degree, but definitely doesn't have a background in science. They hired him as an actor. They found out that he had a good act. Like people looked up to him. He had his Bill Nye the Science Guy that we were all forced to watch in school. I don't know if everybody was, but I know I was. And of course, they start using him as a political tool. And it was a slow transition from science and acting
to promote the transgender agenda and all this crap.
It's very political, and I hope people can recognize how erroneous it would be to take the opinion of a political actor who's masquerading as a scientist, who played a scientist on TV, running around telling everybody about gender and global warming and all these other pseudoscientific frauds. And maybe we'll have time to get into some of that a little bit. I just want to get through this. I want this out there so people can understand and not be confused about my definitions. So getting almost done here. Let's see. An object cannot be defined. The only way to present an object during a scientific presentation is to point to it and utter a sound. That's what we do when we communicate, right? I.e., name it. Okay. This image may be an illustration, a statue, a mock-up, a real thing. After the exhibits phase, an object is treated as a concept for the remainder of the presentation. Okay. A statement of the facts is a description of the initial scene. Its purpose is to introduce the relevant points to the jury. The prosecutor issues the statement of the facts. The jury makes assumptions, okay, i.e., takes the statement of the facts at face value, okay, for the sake of it. A theory is an explanation of the causes of physics or the reasons, okay, philosophy behind a phenomenon. A theory is a movie, a prosecutor's version of how or why something occurred, okay? The theory does not contain any of the frames of the statement of the facts. In order to be rational, a theory must follow form and be founded upon a hypothesis. Science differs from religion in that it does not offer supernatural or irrational explanations for physical phenomena, okay? And when I use the definition of religion, I'm defining it more in terms of what we have today as a result of the Christian Zionist movement, etc., who try to flip around and invert and deify all these concepts like we always talk about. Okay, now the
And
terms.
ignore things like Revelation, where it says, those who say they are Jews and are not, and are of the synagogue of Satan.
Yep, that's a very good point. So the term supernatural refers to a theory for which the proponent presents valid exhibits and can make a movie of the explanation. Okay, that's important to so you can actually visualize something. If I'm presenting it to you, I need to make a movie, so to speak, of it to show the motion. Okay, yet the explanation cannot be imagined. Okay, an example of that is God making matter in zero time, or violates plenty obvious experiences. In examples like Jesus walking on water. Okay, so if I bring God into the world of physics, now all of a sudden, and let me clarify this, because a lot of people get very confused about Bill Gates, because he has a book that's called "Why God Doesn't Exist." And if you actually read the book, what he's explaining is, if you define that which exists as something that you can point to, then by definition God doesn't exist. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't a creator. That doesn't mean, all that means is it's outside of the world of physics, and we need to put all these things in their neat little places so we can understand and communicate to each other without getting into all these circular arguments and debates over it. Okay, this helps us narrow things down. Irrational involves any of the following. Okay, using definitions inconsistently is irrational. Okay, so right off the bat, 99% of the theories that you have probably subscribed to throughout your life are probably really able to be defined as irrational. Using definitions inconsistently is irrational. Okay, you want to make sure to your best of your ability to remove all contradictions, and you want to use the definitions in the words that you speak consistently. And if you have a miscommunication on a definition, it's okay. Go back to what the definition is and say, I define it as this, and this is why it's rational. and then you can start there. And if it's not rational, then the other person can present why. Okay, so we have somewhere to start. Presenting unimaginable objects is also irrational. An example is 4D space-time, and we'll get into that hopefully if we have time at the end of the presentation. I'll go on a little rant about space-time. Zero-dimensional black holes, a one-dimensional line, stuff like that. I think those examples, if I go into those a little bit, hopefully they'll help people kind of understand. Hopefully people are digesting this. Let me know. But okay, moving concepts is irrational. Okay, this is important. An energy transfer, moving the center of mass, applying a force. Okay, um, a force isn't a thing. Okay, there is no such thing as a force. To force is a verb. Okay, so if I'm gonna have surface to surface contact with something else and I can push it or force it, then I know what the medium is. But just making up and
force.
calling the medium or the mediator another concept is completely irrational. And I hope people understand the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek science and actual rational critical thinking. I hope I don't piss anybody off by saying that. So substituting an object for a concept is irrational. Okay, so substituting a heart for love, a point for location, and I can get into that if anybody wants to know the specifics about points, locations, vectors, dimensions, coordinates, etc. It's important, especially because so many people confuse it and think that there are more than three dimensions. There are only there are only three dimensions, and I'll maybe get into that. Or a ghost for the soul, stuff like that. Those are examples. The explanation or theory doesn't follow from the assumptions, hypothesis. So your theory, your explanation is irrational if it doesn't follow the hypothesis and the assumptions. Okay, and I tell you these things because if you really go through a lot of these theories you've been taught, especially theory of relativity, string theory, all these theories, you'll realize we got a problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah. And, first of all, none of these guys that present this stuff agree on it. But yeah, it's like, Einstein's relativity theory. It's like, every person who observes something is observing it from a different position or angle. So therefore, you can't ever observe the same thing, essentially. And, and that's way oversimplifying it. But, and then when you get into quantum physics, you realize that none of these quantum physicists have this. None of them can discuss the terms. And thank you, Polygonal, for donating again. Thank you, Julia, also for your support. Polygonal donated twice today. And hopefully some of you are throwing Caleb some change, too, for all of his work and support. mick.caleb@gmail.com. And... but quantum physics is so irrational when you realize that it's all built on Kantian philosophy, that it's all about making the math or the map the territory. Mm-hmm. And, all of these, first you start with an entirely, thank you, Philip, you start with an entirely false premise, and then you build theories on top of that. And that's what all of these guys have done. And, Albert Einstein is probably one of the biggest frauds in history, but people tout this guy like he was some sort of genius. He was considered, almost retarded as a boy, and he pretty much was. I mean, when your life is built upon fraud and getting people to believe you're fraud, that's not real thinking. It's like the person who goes around the beach kicking over sandcastles and thinks he knows how to build a sandcastle.
Yes, sir. Yeah, actually, I'd love to go into as much quantum physics as I could too. I don't know if we'll have time. There's so much.
Yeah, well, and we haven't even really hit gravity yet. So
yeah,
maybe we should
just to mention real quickly about segue a tad over from from RSM, because I don't know if people are really stoked on it but for as far as the quantum physics stuff. Okay, the quantum physics stuff, if people aren't aware, there is a very uh, uh, there's a whole bunch of experiments themselves. Like, you can use the rational scientific method to completely debunk quantum physics very easily. However, if you're actually looking for tangible things, one experiment that debunks quantum physics is atom compressibility. The atom compressibility experiment completely goes against all of the basis of the theory of quantum physics. I don't know how scientific oriented the listeners are. I could get into it more, but I'll just kind of summarize some of it. So there's also, I don't know, I'm sure everybody's heard of the double slit experiment that they talk about. It's in What the Bleep Do We Know? It's in a lot of the um, like The Secret and all these all
Yeah,
these
and Brian Greene was out there years ago promoting quantum physics and all this stuff, and
so the double slit experiment can actually be completely debunked by a needle. If you, I actually believe it was possibly Bill Gates who figured that out. He did the experiment. You actually can shine a laser right at the head of a needle, and you can get the same exact interference patterns as you do if you send them through slits. And it's just a completely erroneous idea that you're shooting electrons through an electron gun that is, bouncing particles off of the walls and creating interference patterns. And it's either a wave or it's a particle. And I'm here to say, like I said, I have a lot of theories that I would love to go into. I will say that I do not believe in the electron. If anybody wants to know more about why I don't believe in the electron, look up Dewey B. Larson. He's got great content on that. So does actually even Ed Leedskolden, who I like to study because he's an interesting figure. I'm sure people out there know about Coral Castle, but he wrote about how there's no such thing as electrons. Walter Russell talks about how there are no such thing as electrons and particles, nuclear atoms, and these things. Yeah, I mean, there's a really good presentation from Robert Otte and Matt Presti called Quantum Quackery. I think it's a 2-hour presentation. Then they actually go through and they talk about that book that got so much popularity with quantum physics. It was like what was it, the Tao of Physics or something like that. Somebody in the chat probably can help me out with that. But there's a lot of links that I would like to provide to anybody who wants more information. But quantum physics, David Harriman, you already mentioned him. There's so much out there.
And for those who want to, and we should post that one. I haven't heard or seen that one, but for those who want to see David Harriman stuff, go into the Logos Media website. It's under Trivium Education Study, and you can scroll back down to 2011, and you'll see 2 shows with him there, and we go pretty deep in those shows.
Yeah, it'd actually be real cool to try to get Robert Otte on, try to get him to talk. He actually wrote a book about gravity too. I wrote an article about gravity, and he kind of was really inspirational in that. And I also have a friend named Jason Verbelli. I don't know if you guys know him, but he's been a long time buddy. I can't say enough good things about Jason, but if you go to his YouTube channel, he has saved me so much work uploading all the good stuff. Yeah, so here on screen right now is an article I wrote that was published by Ether Force a little while ago about gravity. I'll kind of go into it just a tad for you if people are interested. But if you want to read the whole entire thing, I don't think I have time to read the whole thing or go into every single detail, but I'll kind of try to summarize.
And it is down there in the notes there, folks, for you to read. But yeah, I would like to cover some of that. It is in our notes. I mean, we've only covered like the first 3 points so far in our notes, I think, for the show.
There's so much of it, man, and I'm trying to get through it. And
It's
I'm sure
like,
you
just
guys will like the RSM a lot more if I go through and I explain more about, like, if I give you the examples, they'll all click with you.
right.
Um, but
Well, and
but
maybe we
just
should give a few examples, and people don't realize, like, well, so, and I've been thinking about gravity because when you realize all these, like Newton and Rene Descartes and Emanuel Swedenborg and John Dee, these were the old mystics who were also the spies, and it's like, of course, they're seeding out false information, and they were the original guys putting this junk out there. And then when you start actually analyzing it, it all breaks down. But, so then you realize, like you pointed out, gravity is actually pressure.
mhm.
And, and then there's the whole ether thing. That's a whole other discussion. There's the dinosaur hoax. There's, debunking the nuclear atom, global warming, et cetera, and these are, things that we've circled around, but we haven't really gone into the minutia of each of these theories, like with, with Holly and I doing the shows on the Royal Society, which is a massive pseudoscientific organization that just pumps out garbage like Rupert Sheldrake, et cetera, and, Cannibalism by Richard Dawkins, and, of course, he promoted my former co-host, etc. And then you start looking at these theories, more closely, and they're totally garbage. And no wonder the Royal Society's cranking this crap out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful that you guys are going through all that grammar for sure. So yeah, the as far as the we've got ourselves into to a point now where we need to go 100 years or more, at least 100 years back in time, and start over with just about every scientific thing, science, every field, all our discoveries. We really should. This is about being skeptical. Okay, this is healthy skepticism. People will be out there calling you paranoid, and because for questioning all these things, but it, don't let them get to you, because you have to start with the grammar. And if you don't, this is what happens. You end up casting nets into the ocean and pulling the net out and trying to catch the water molecules. I mean, it's ridiculous. We started off on the wrong foot, and we've gotten to a point now. Yeah, somebody in the chat said try 500. Yeah, I was kind of being a little uh, conservative with it. But if you really start tracing back all these ideas, patterns emerge, and that's why Jan's work, as far as the who, um, really makes a big difference in your understanding of how this agenda started to play out. We definitely are starting to see motive, and see, why they started uh, completely flipping upside down and inverting everything. So I'll just say a little bit about the inversion that Jan was just
Well,
talking about.
before you do start on that, before the show, you and I were talking about thermodynamics, the law of thermodynamics, and this is the whole thing of calories for diet and nutrition. So people take, okay, so I have this piece of food, and if I burn it, it's going to give off this much heat and energy for this long. And so then, people are under the false assumption that they need to count calories for food. And it's not the calories that's important, it's the type of food that you eat. So, if you're eating a high grain, high legume diet, you're going to have far more problems than someone who's on a high fat, high protein diet, et cetera, especially the high fat diet with lots of veggies. And, so when you realize that is it your body absorbing the nutrients and taking in the vitamins and the proteins and all of this stuff, or is your body burning it? So since what I forget now, the 1920s or whatever, people think that their bodies are burning the food.
Yep.
So when you realize that we're absorbing it and taking it in, and then what's left, the waste goes out the other end, obviously it's not lit with a match. It doesn't come out as black carbon. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, I get the same. That's a great correlation there. But another one is the inversion of the acid alkaline. I don't know if a lot of people know about that, but I went to school for um, for detoxification and a little bit of and nutrition, et cetera. And I was taught, it was an alternative school, but I was taught that acids are what cause cancer, and that you should be drinking alkaline water and all this nonsense. And later I find out that you want your stomach to be acidic. You want your stomach to be able to digest food. It's naturally acidic, your stomach acid, right? We all know stomach acid has a pH of like 2, right? What happens if you drink a bunch of alkaline water? You kind of mess up, And so some of your body needs to be alkaline, like say your pancreas secretes, what is it, beta, it's just like baking soda, carbonate. But that helps digest food. So what you're really doing is you put food in your mouth, and people will be like, you can't eat that much fat. It's like putting a bunch of bacon grease down a drain. It's like, does the drain have stomach acid? No. Your stomach has acid that breaks down the fat. It isn't the same at all. And people are like, well, you shouldn't eat that much fat. That just seems like your cardiovascular system will
Yeah, here, have some whole grains instead. And meanwhile, it's like a heart attack and obesity
Exactly.
and all of these problems. But, that's, to your point, that's how I cured myself from years of hospital visits. Was 15 years worth was eating a high-fat diet. And when
Exactly.
people begin to understand what ketosis is, and a friend of mine, Steve, he's got a whole new layer of stuff of how the sun's energy is absorbed. Like when you eat plants, it's a different type of energy that you can't process as well. And when the animals eat it and you eat the animals, you can take in their energy more easily in the form of those fats. So there's a whole thing to that, and I need to follow up with him and get more information on that so that we can do a show on that, hopefully sometime soon as well. But there's a whole other layer to ketosis that we haven't gotten to. So so let's sorry to interrupt you there, a little segue there. So let's go into gravity.
Gravity.
And
okay.
This is going to mind blow people away who haven't read Caleb's paper yet.
Yeah, I recommend you read the paper. I'll try to summarize it here so that people have an idea. Well, maybe it'll convince them to go read it. But as far as what I view gravity as, the experiments that I've seen, and I could list all the experiments, but when you do experiments to try to figure this out, the most simple way, because I believe when I try to come up with a hypothesis for people, I try to simplify it as easy as I can to understand. If you really actually understand something, you should be able to explain it to a 7-year-old. I believe that. So the way that I look at it is this. Okay, so people should look into the barometer and how the barometer was invented, and why it was invented. And when you look at it, it's a tube. I hope you go watch the video that I put so you can see the visualization.
Barometer.
What are we doing? A barometer is what? It's measuring what? It's measuring pressure, right? The barometric pressure, right? So we know that the pressure changes depending on certain conditions, right? Okay, so we're taught that gravity is there's the strong gravitational field, the weak gravitational field, and that the moon and all of us are stuck to this ball and we don't fly off of it spinning through Earth because of a downward pull. Okay, now does that really make sense when you look at the whole entire theory of gravity? Well, and I'm glad Jan already came out, Jan and Holly, and talked a little bit about Newton and how shady of a figure that guy is. But so pressure is what keeps down something this is the chart of density that he just pulled up. So if there is a whole bunch of different liquids with different densities. Um, the densities uh, are what mediate where the pressure is. Okay, so why do we look outside into our atmosphere and see the exact same phenomena, but we have to invert it and say that it's all being sucked as opposed to a pressure? That's what I'd like to know. Yeah, buoyancy um, goes hand in hand in this. So like you have the ocean. Okay, things above the ocean line fall, right? Like say a basketball falls down into the ocean, but once it gets into the ocean, it goes back up. You wouldn't say that it's anti-gravity when the basketball floats back up. You would say it's buoyancy and density, correct?
Correct.
So why are we saying that there is something called gravity, which isn't rational to begin with, because we don't know the mediator. We don't know what is actually pushing, pulling, performing actions. So I hope the rational scientific method gets people thinking on that level. People in the chat are mentioning Ken Wheeler. Yeah, so Ken Wheeler is great. I would say go check out most of Ken Wheeler stuff. He's got really great content. He's one of the guys that if first started making he didn't invent it, but he first started making the ferrocell, which is the image of the magnet that I have on my Facebook page. Um, and it's very important that we just mentioned magnetism, because magnetism and the pressure thing that I'm talking about is similar, because you'll listen to these guys like Feynman and others talk about the magnetic force. Like what is it that is repelling and attracting? And then they proceed to tell you that they don't have any way to explain it to you other than to make something up, like a rubber band uh, is pulling them together. Okay, well that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for what is the actual thing is involved in the gravitational pull, and is it rational? Well, you come up with this whole entire theory about there's a pull, but there are so many contradictions, and the contradictions, like, so the earth has such a strong gravitational pull that it can hold the moon and it can hold us on it. However, um, it things like spaceships still have enough can use enough thrust to get off of the earth. It doesn't make as much sense as if you invert it and you think of, okay, it's just a downward force of pressure, and the downward force of pressure has layers of atmosphere in it, and it's the the whole earth is this perfectly balanced thing that is all settled, and everything, all the elements, like that's what's important about Walter Russell's work, is the elements are really going through more and more complexity, and some of them get heavier and more denser, and you have all these perfect layers that all perfectly match up in this perfect system that we have, and it all has much more to do with what I would say is a pressure, not a pull. And I could talk about the differences between the theories and what I think about it. That's all in the article I wrote. Somebody's mentioning Eric Dollard in the chat. I have kind of I don't know. I guess I shouldn't necessarily go out publicly and bash the guy or anything, but I would say go and look up what is the documentary. One of the Ether Force guys put out a documentary on Eric Dollard. I know personally a friend. I'll just say his name's David. He's a very good friend who used to work with Eric Dollard, and Thomas Joseph Brown has already went public with what he says about Dollard. I would say look into that. Eric Dollard is a guy, for people don't know, he tried to digest all the Tesla ether stuff, and he does experiments. He's pretty brilliant guy. I can't take that away from him. He's an electric engineer by trade. He's a brilliant guy, but be very skeptical of him. I don't want him to segue the whole thing, but I think it's called something's Messiah. anyways, I'll link it later for that.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say thanks, Brian, and who is the other one? Thank you, Transtrom, for your donations. There was also Philip Thompson. I don't think I mentioned earlier. I may have, but thank you all for your support, and please also support Caleb for all the time and effort he puts in for his stuff. Mick, M-I-C-K Caleb, C-A-L-E-B @gmail.com.
Yeah, and so the other thing I'll mention, thank you for that, by the way. And the other thing I'll mention as far as the gravity goes, there are some really good papers, and there's actually some really good videos, so you can kind of visualize part of what the way that I look at the push gravity thing. There's a guy named Walter, or wait, what is it? It's W.C. Wright, and I have his papers linked in my article. And also the videos linked in the article. But he actually had over 1,000 working models that showed how he basically just used magnets, and he showed how you can create all the exact phenomena we see with the pressure of the tides that we think are caused by the moon, right? And so he's got working models that are like basically built out of magnets, showing that it could all be caused by push. He's got all the magnets set up so that they're repelling, and all of his models work, and they make complete sense about the motions and of the everything. And the other thing I'll mention is just that the forces that we're talking about, and forces are just a completely irrational thing to say. That's why these sciences need the rational scientific method, and we need to rewrite them. And that's what I'm working on taking a lot of these theories, digesting them, reworking them so that they're simplifying science. And I for years I wanted that domain name, Simplify Science. I wish I would have got it, but that's the website I would love to make to digest some of this stuff, so that people, because there's just so much that stops people from even getting into this stuff, right? It takes, I mean, even for somebody who's watching Ken Wheeler. Ken Wheeler's got great content, but he uses big words, and I've tried telling him multiple times, man, you need to come up with more digestible terms. I'm sure people that know that watch his videos know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, as far as all the other examples of gravity, my take on it is that it's a push. There's a lot of there's a way, like I was saying before, there's a way to at least debunk that it's not a pull. I'm sure that would stand up in a logical courtroom, a rational scientific courtroom. There's absolutely no way that the gravity theory would hold up. And like I said, read that article. There's a book that Robert O'Tay published on gravity too, if somebody wants that information. But somebody's in the chat is asking about John Hutchinson. I have a really good friend who went out and stayed with John Hutchinson for a little while. If for those of you who don't know who he is, he's the guy behind the Hutchinson effect, and is kind of stirred up the alternative science forums for a long time. People trying to figure out what the heck's going on there. He's got metal objects that are just look completely mangled and twisted, and he shows videos of just putting it in a box, and supposedly he just hooks up some frequencies in an oscilloscope and a radio frequency generator, and screws with all that stuff, which is very interesting. And I have also seen very interesting experiments in person. I'm still trying to figure out how to get my hands on some of Eric Dollard's old experiments, but it's just so hard to find those old cathode ray tubes that he used to use. But I could get into that at some point.
Somebody says, Spec says, one man's push is another man's pull. It's all subjective. They're falling right into Einstein's relativity, and it's whatever you make it or whatever you know.
So yeah, I mean, I actually have a pretty large note just on the fact that I don't believe that there is such thing as a pull. And I actually got that idea from my friend Jason Verbelli. He explained it to me in all different types of scientific examples that really made sense to me, and I'd like to read them at some point to you guys. But one of the examples is just, you know, you can go to the bottom of the ocean and you can dig um, sand out of the bottom of the ocean floor, and every time you dig, it isn't that there's things being sucked into the void. It's just that it's a push. Things are being pushed in there from. Uh, if two people are walking through a crowd, they're pushing through the crowd to get to each other. They're not drawn to each other. You know, that's why it's almost an irrational term to say that there is such a thing as the law of attraction and things like this. Um, yeah, I don't necessarily. I mean, it's like this. So if if you and I are standing across from each other and I'm moving an object centrifugally, it appears centripetally to you, right? It looks like it's going a different direction.
Correct.
But when you zoom out and you look at what the reality is, it's the object is still moving in the direction that I'm spinning it. Okay, and if you flip you and I around, you see it going from one another. That doesn't necessarily mean that from your perspective it absolutely is centripetal, and from mine it is centrifugal. What it means. So our job, for the guy who made that comment, our job is to align our perceptions with that which is, not to say, okay, well, your truth is different than my truth,
Right.
and all this
Opinions are
nonsense.
like a-holes, and you throw your arms up in the air and you give up rather than digging down and finding the truth.
That's what the RSM and the Trivium are its main. So you and I can communicate without all these abstract concepts that contradict each other. Okay,
Right.
like what exactly what you just said. There is no, you know. Okay, so anyways, moving on. So let's see what else is in the notes here. Um, I mean, you know, I'd really like to talk more about the gravity thing. I know it's a long note, and I want to at least maybe get through a couple of these real quick. Um, Wanted to mention the electric universe real quickly.
Well, somebody has, before you go into the electric universe, and I do want to get into that, No One's Flower says, what about motion caused by the flow of the river, push or pull? So is there something at the end of the river pulling it down, or is there a push, making it flow down? And, maybe we can come up with some more analogies to explain the push thing, but, it's like different, like that photo, that image of yours. I'm going to show that again here. So it's like this thing here, and you have different pressures going on, and some pressures, lamp oil at the top, and you have the ping pong ball up at the very top, rubbing alcohol, a soda cap floating, vegetable oil, beads floating here, water here, dish soap with a cherry tomato in it, milk here, maple syrup and dye floating there, corn syrup, and you have a popcorn kernel floating there toward the bottom, and then at the top of the corn syrup, and then honey with a bolt in it. So all of these things are different densities, and they're putting on or exerting different pressures. And
Yeah, what
so
are we gonna say that the ball at the top just doesn't have a strong enough electrical connection or a gravitational connection to the earth to pull it downward? You know, it's asinine. You know, we're talking about weight, density, buoyancy. These things make way more sense. Why do we need to invent a whole nother word called gravity if we already have the words in our vocabulary to describe the exact same phenomena? We don't. And that's the point. We don't need to even say the word gravity because we already have buoyancy, like I said, buoyancy, weight, and pressure. And, you know, these words. Somebody's mentioned in Schauberger, like, okay, so the question is, the person asked, so is the water, when it flows downhill, when things flow downhill, it starts up high and goes down and gains momentum and goes to a lower place because of density, correct? That's
And then
what.
when the pressure is equalized, it stops flowing. So when a river hits the ocean, that's more water, and it's going to stop flowing because it's met something of its own density and pressure.
Exactly. And actually, Victor Schauberger, I recommend, what's my favorite book by his? I think it's called Living Energy by Colin Coates. Go check out I just posted all of Victor Schauberger's complete works. If you guys want to go check him out, he's the water wizard. Definitely recommend all of his stuff. I'm kind of a water geek. Uh, I'm definitely a snob with all my water stuff. I used to
So
be
who's
a.
that? Who's that Japanese guy?
Oh yeah, separate all of the water stuff that I talk about from Masaru Emoto. I do not believe in any of the Dr.
Yeah,
Masaru
he
Emoto
he
stuff.
was debunked. What did they show that at different temperatures in the freezer or whatever, it created the different things? And I saw this whole debunking of him. It was like 5 years ago, where they were easily able to debunk him.
Man, I really hope people start to think in terms of the rational scientific method and the trivium, because it will save you from, going down these, rabbit holes thinking that these little magic tricks and
Do
being
you
deceived are
do you
reality.
think that the rational scientific method people would mind having the method being put up on the Trivium Education or website?
Well, I think it'd be a good idea to contact them. They're really good guys. They're down to earth, but they also are very particular because of Bill Gaty. One thing I'll say about Bill Gaty is he is, how do I put it? He's definitely not meek. Let's just put it like that. He's a scientific thinker, and it is things are the way he wants them to be. It's his work, and he, a lot of times I would say get permission, but that's just my 2 cents on it. But I'm sure they wouldn't mind. Last time I talked to Mike Hutner, he was always telling me, go ahead and spread it wherever, as long as you're not changing it or trying to take credit for it or whatever.
Well, it's just like that one that you have posted that I shared today on Facebook. And just credit it to him, or who would I credit it to? I don't mind putting.
I always just put, make sure you check out the Rational Scientific Method Facebook group at the very bottom. Um, because most of their content, they half the guys in there are anonymous. Like one of the guys, Monkey Mind, he's completely anonymous, doesn't even show his face, and have no clue what his real name is. But Bill Gates is the only guy that I know that actually published a book in his name on it. So just give credit to him, and I'm sure he'd be stoked about it.
Good to know. Yeah, it's like the scientific method. Most people just swear by that and thoughtlessly regurgitate it as if it's like some crowning glory of achievement. And all it means is that you have a circle jerk of professors who approve what you say
Mm-hmm.
and agree to that your stuff coincides with theirs enough that they'll publish it, and
Exactly.
they'll
Yep.
they'll agree to it, and they won't publish things that are contrary to their views, and I've had one review published, but it's years ago, and I tried to have for instance, my Gordon Wasson paper published in peer review, and immediately the other so-called scientists in the field of ethnobotany immediately jumped down the throat and turned it down, that it wouldn't be published, and not because of any reason that they could show wrong with the research. It was because it showed all of their research was wrong.
Yep. That's actually one of the reasons why I delve so deep into um, I would say, the mainstream scientific world, even though I knew it was completely false, um, was just so that I could try to get through to some of the people in the peer review, and I wouldn't just be overwhelmed with their arguments and their lame attempts to just shut down discussion like they always do. Um, so yeah, I would say the peer review system is a really ingenious. Unfortunately, you really have to kind of sit in awe of how well it has worked to just shut up anybody who's outside of their little club. And that's what it is. It's completely all um, exclusive. They will take away all of your funding. They'll just kick you right out of all their circles. You'll lose your job, your tenure, all of it if you go against the grain. And then people are scared to come out and talk about it
Oh,
too.
yeah. Well, when I published that paper on WAS, in fact, all of those papers exposing ethnobotany, I had, and I used to work with about 50, 60 different professors and researchers in ethnobotany. They all turned on me in a week, the whole field, and, it was just because I exposed all of their stuff. And then and we should really get into this because this is very important in understanding academic cells, because when I published my paper, Spies in Academic Clothing, that showed literally how the whole operation works. And you can take that paper and you can apply it elsewhere. But I mentioned this paper a lot. It took me a long time to write it. It's a long article, but extremely important in understanding how academia and these intelligence communities, et cetera, how they control all of the information and how people see things and think, And so what they do is and there's a quote here that I should read. It's really good from Bill Clinton's former professor, Carol Quigley. By the interaction of these various branches on one another, under the pretense that each branch was an autonomous power, the influence of each branch was an autonomous power, and the influence of each branch was increased through the process of mutual reinforcement. The unanimity among the various branches was believed by the outside world to be the result of the influence of a single truth, while in reality it was the result of the existence of a single group.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, a statesman, a member of the group, announces a policy. About at the same time, the Royal Institute of International Affairs publishes a study on the subject, and an Oxford Don, a Fellow of All Souls, and a member of the group also publishes a volume on the subject, probably through a publishing house like G. Bell and Sons or Faber and Faber, allied to the group. The statesman's policy is subjected to critical analysis and final approval in a leader in the Times, while the two books are reviewed in a single review in the Times Literary Supplement. Both the leader and the review are anonymous, but were written by members of the group. And finally, at about the same time, an anonymous article in the Round Table strongly advocates the same policy. The cumulative effect of such tactics as this, even if each tactical move influences only a small number of important people, is bound to be great. So this is how they perpetuate these frauds. It's like this is exactly how Darwin's theory was promoted under the X Club, and I've written on that before. Darwin, Huxley, and the Esalen Institute, how they launched the 2012 and psychedelic revolutions. But when we get into this stuff, we can see that, and people can get into this. Aldous Huxley's grandfather, Thomas Henry Huxley, another big fraud. Anything that the Huxley family has touched, any member of the Huxley family that I've ever come across, it's a hot, stinky pile. And so, one of these groups, or that Carol Quigley was just referencing, was the X Club, and the X Club is is how they promoted Darwin's theories, and they took 8 people and they put them out into various high-level universities, and then said this is the gospel truth, and then that was how the theory was promoted out. And it's like when you get down and you begin to look at it, it's like, just at the fundamental level, you can say, okay, well, all life consumes other life, okay? And so then, for animals, how many life forms just popped out of the primordial mud at once to feed the other life forms? So, was it only one life form that crawled out of the mud by itself at once? And then, well, it would have had to die. What would have eaten?
Exactly.
So if you start looking at things like this, it's just like, wait a second. Well, then, all of these things. So then you have to have at least 2 life forms to eat, and then one life form eats the other one, and then you're back to one. So then, well, there had to be more than two that climbed out at once. So then there had to be a whole bunch that climbed out at once. And then, and then it's like, all right, well, the whole theory starts to crumble just at the fundamental level, and you can say, they claim that they've found life in a rock, 1,000 feet underground or whatever, and these things that could reproduce or whatever, and maybe they were, at the base level, maybe they're eating oil or something like that, but it's these theories really start to fall apart if you just look at them on their fundamental level. So, okay, so these first things, then they all ate oil. So then why are we saying that oil is harmful for us when it's the lifeblood of the planet, et cetera? But yeah, all of the science that we've been given starts to crumble. And thank you, Sammy Sam, for the $5 donation. And thank you, Philip, for the additional $5 donation. Thank you all for supporting the show tonight and everything. We're almost, we should probably wrap it up in like 10 minutes here. Did we even touch, we hardly even got into the stuff we wanted to hit, really.
I've been trying to move as fast as I could. I'm glad you just brought that stuff that I would love to get into, give you my perspective on all that evolution stuff. I got great notes on it. Real quickly, I just wanted to mention, I'm glad Polygonal Construction is doing great in the chats, asking all these awesome questions. I wanted to at least address one of them. He's talking about, he asks, how do trout swim up 50-foot waterfalls to spawn? They don't just swim up at the shape of the fish, and the vortex of the waterfall will draw up the fish. So he's asking questions about push and pull, and a lot of people are, want to know more about that. And, I would love to give you my notes on that. I know we don't have time to go over it because I think it'll help clear some of that stuff up. But what Schauberger talks about in that specific example, if you look at a good example is if you take an ice cube, okay, and you kind of squeeze it at the back, it pushes forward with a whole bunch of force. And what Schauberger talks about in all of his books is not that the fish is pulling himself up, like I was saying before about push. What they do when they sit in the stream and they just swim very little, and they're going against, it almost seems like they're going against gravity, like anti-gravity. What they're doing is creating these little vortexes behind their body, and their shape is just shaped just perfectly so that it pushes them, kind of like the ice cube. And we would be much better off if we designed our watercraft and aircraft in very similar ways. You could design something like water bubbles that go in front of a watercraft underwater, and it creates a less pressure in the front and more pressure behind.
Less resistance,
which pushes you. Like I'm saying, it's all about push. Someone said, what if two people walk the opposite way, in the crowd? Well, you're still pushing through the crowd, right? Anyways, I'll leave the whole push thing alone for a second.
Yeah.
Someone else made a really good comment here I wanted to get at. It's go ahead. What were you going to say? I'll try to read these.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you want to go longer, maybe we can get some more supporters for tonight's show and get some more donations, get some people to send you some donations directly for all of your work, and maybe we can keep it going a little bit longer here. If you'd like.
I don't mind, man. I ate a bunch of fat for lunch, so I'll be good.
I'm getting low on fat. Wait a second. I think there's a little bit left in here. Hold on.
You got some coffee?
Yeah.
Lucky. All right. I don't mind going a little bit longer if people want to hear it. So if people aren't bored and want to know more, I'd love to keep going. Sometimes I just keep ranting and I just won't stop until someone stops me. So you tell me.
Right. And just so you know, Polygonal and others, Caleb is in our Sunday Logos Roundtable sessions now, as is Steven Sorensen, who just popped up in the chat just now. So thanks to both of you for taking part of that. And Mark Warhol is a part of that, and we'll rotate other guests, and we'll rotate the moderator weekly, etc. So I don't know who's going to moderate this one this Sunday, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, and yeah, please do. But I also want to give a shout out to all these guys in the chat. You guys are really impressing me. I don't run into a lot of people that have coherent dialogue and rhetoric to ask me these questions. Brian Kerr asked about Stephen Carruthers, which is what we were just actually about to get into the electric universe stuff. Man, we could talk about that for a while. I don't know if people
let's definitely hit that a little bit. We haven't heard from Jacob Duelman for like 6-7 months, unfortunately. So yeah, we'd love to get him back on. Leopold Lasic, that looks like a former Yugoslavian name, either Serbian or Croat. Welcome to the show.
Oh, I'd love to get Jacob in here. Hopefully we can locate him and get him in here on those.
Thank you, Bahera.
Okay, so as far as the electric universe stuff, Stephen Carruthers is my all-time favorite electric universe guy. And I'm kind of a nerd. I like I like ways to debunk the theories with their own math. I think that's awesome, and that's what Stephen Carruthers is great at. Stephen Carruthers, for those of you who don't know who he is, I believe he's an Aussie, and he is a mathematical physicist or just a mathematician. But he figured out, here's the thing. There's all these people doing like presenting all this mathematical equations, and most people don't want to take the time to go through the entire equation. These are very complex in mathematical physics. You pretty much have to go get a degree in what is it? Partial differential. What's the thing that Isaac Newton invented? Whatever. All those.
Oh, you mean calculus or
yeah,
which?
Yeah.
Well, he didn't invent it. The Indians invented it in Calcutta, and then he stole it. That's why it's called calculus, because it's from Calcutta. But he just pretended that he invented it.
That is true. Thanks for correcting me on that. So, so Stephen Carruthers, for example, one of the cool things he talks about is, so if you go through and you do the math of a black hole in black hole theory, and you actually do the math, you'll realize that it is in direct opposition to the other theories. One of them being obviously black holes, because black holes are asymptotically curved. In the theory, you're using math, using asymptotically curved math and structure, and in the other, it's asymptotically flat. So it's like obviously you can't have an asymptotically curved and an asymptotically flat. These two theories they're not even on their basic math level, they're not compatible. So if you learn that, then you're like, okay, well, what else isn't compatible? Then you find out that general relativity and special relativity are not compatible, and that's why we keep calling them theories, correct?
Right.
Which I would argue should not even be called a theory. But so that's a little, I won't get too geeky about that. Go check out Stephen Carruthers' videos.
Somebody just post about Carruthers there.
Yeah, Carruthers is great.
Gospod Lasic wants to know about Leibniz.
Yeah, well, we should probably reserve a little bit more time to talk about.
Are we going to get some more donations for continuing the show here, folks? We did get like $15. Thank you for the donations, Lex Van Man and Bahera. Goodness, I one of these days I'll get that one correct. Thanks so much for that. We really appreciate it. And Denalian also donated $9.99. Thank you for that as well.
So yeah, thanks guys. So I would briefly mention, as far as the electric universe stuff, just so people know where I stand. As far as the David Talbot stuff, now that I've read Fomenko, I would say that I'm a little iffy on the symbols of the alien sky stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, when you get into alien skies and whatnot,
Fomenko's got, I think, a much better model, and that's a lot of that's based on Velikovsky, and I think you've already touched on Velikovsky a little bit.
Now, it
So,
didn't Talbot come up with the holographic universe as well?
ooh, the holographic universe. Did he come up with that?
I think I have him. Well, I have him in the brain connected with that now. Now, I'm just going to show the brain database here because this is important because Michael Talbot, and thank you, Brian, for that. Michael Talbot was promoted by the Village Voice. Of course, the Village Voice was in Greenwich Village. Let's see. So you have, the Greenwich Village was a major center of MK Ultra. John Wilcox, some of those people were promoted out of that. Allen Ginsberg and the whole pedophilia movement was promoted out of that. So I'd be careful. The East Village Other was Walter Boart. And I've exposed him as another spy and another academic cell. But, the Village Voice, these organizations that promote this stuff, just be careful when you're going through it, because if they're promoting it, there's probably, some agenda behind it.
Could that have been Michael Talbot instead of David Talbot?
Yeah, you might. I may have just confused the two there. So thanks for the correction on that. If I'm incorrect there, thank you.
I'll look up the citation that I have for it and double check. But yeah, no, that's good info regardless. And then as far as the rest of the electric universe stuff, one thing I do have some beef with them. They have had some censorship. I haven't really publicly announced a lot of it because I don't like starting, fights and wars. I like that the Electric Universe guys put out the Electric Universe content, especially Wallace Thornhill and another really good water wizard to look up is what's his name, the fourth phase guy. I can't believe I just blanked on his name.
Maybe somebody will post it up here
in the chat.
The
water
it's
guy,
probably David Talbot, but let's see. I was just looking to see if somebody posted that up here in the notes for us or in the chat.
Yeah, somebody will, I'm sure. I can't believe I forgot it. But anyways, yeah, so there's a lot of really good content.
Losich just said, Caleb, you totally ruined. Oh, thank you, Social Monkey. He said, you totally ruined my study for a mechanics exam. Thank you, Social Monkey, for the $50 donation. Much appreciated. That's a big thanks or big help.
Nice. Right on. Well, the other Electric Universe guys that I really like, go check out Pierce Corbin. He, in my opinion, is one of the best at debunking the global warming fraud. And he pretty much shows undeniable evidence, because this guy has been like, he's one of the most Gerald Pollack is the water guy. Thanks for putting that in there. But Pierce Corbin, this guy, I think his name's Pierce Corbin. I got so many name drops. I'm sorry for all the name drops, guys, but I stand on the shoulders of giants. I have to give credit where credit is due. But go check out, if you ever get in an argument with he's Jeremy Corbyn's big brother. I don't know if he's still alive. I think I heard some bad news. I don't know if it was true a little while ago. But if you go check out his website, it's like weatheraction.com, I believe. They have undeniable evidence with predictions he's been one of the most successful predictors of weather that we've ever had. But he goes on the Electric Universe and does these presentations that will pretty much convince most people that the sun is the sole driver of the climate. Like, man is such a small little part of it. And, he's got models that predict weather based on solar cycles. And, that's one of the big things in the Electric Universe is that the sun isn't what you think it is. It isn't. It's more of an electrical well, see, I said I wasn't going to get into all of my theories because that will take us on tangents. But yeah, go check him out. There's also a lot of really good stuff and content coming out about electricity, lightning, all that stuff. So yeah, go check that out. But be skeptical of it. Obviously, be skeptical of everything I say and go do the research yourself. But yeah, the electric universe stuff in general is very awesome. Uh, Mark is mentioning the Primer fields. I have a lot to say about the Primer fields. I think the first one is great. I also think he needs a lot of work with his models explaining his phenomena better. I think he goes off on a couple of really irrational theories in especially in parts 2 and 3. But I'd be happy to talk to you about that, Mark. At some point, I got a bunch of notes on all that good stuff. Let's see. At this point, I'm just
Yeah.
kind of flowing with the
Yeah, you
chats.
might as well. I mean, they're just, but yeah, we were planning on going more into the electric universe, but Spec just commented about the ether, and we were planning on talking about that, but we pulled it because it's too vast and too much muck, and then the entire theory needs to be rewritten. Do you want to just touch on it?
Yeah, sure. I have no problem with that. Actually, the best, you know, I all my information that I got about the ether theory that I'm very skeptical about, uh, I got from the Rational Scientific Method group. They kind of like turned me on to some stuff where I was like, huh, I never thought about that. And what else? Robert Otte has been huge in personally like kind of explaining to me because I was in, let me just put it out there, like, my background a little bit, maybe people understand. So I was in a Ether Force group for the longest time. I created the Ether Force Facebook group, and the owner of the Facebook domain's name was Ray. Ray got me into. He started interviewing me, saw my work, really liked my work. Um, so I got on that Ether Force team for a while. Um, that Ether Force group kind of became a little bit stagnant because I tried getting a lot of people to come together. I went out to California and did a talk, tried to get everybody to come together. It took me a long time to realize how hard it was to get people from different scientific backgrounds to communicate and not, get at each other's throat because brilliant people are not always real good with people skills. Um, so I did my best to organize groups. I ended up kind of segueing against that and focusing more like I am today. By the way, this is all review. A lot of this stuff is review. I'm not doing as much work as I should be on this stuff. This is kind of all old. I had to kind of cram and get it all ready for the show because it was perfect timing because Holly and Jan were right into the segueing from the Royal Society stuff to Einstein, so then the ether stuff comes up, obviously. So just a little bit of background there for you. So Robert Otte kind of messaged me and was like, hey, man, you know, you might want to, I guess I can't, I don't want to publicly like, screw anybody's day up. So I'll just kind of keep it general. But Robert was just kind of like, hey, man, have you ever thought about how ether is just, you know, kind of an irrational theory and it doesn't really vibe at all with Walter Russell's theories. So my job has been kind of with Robert Otte here and there. Um, it's been a long time since I've contacted him. I should probably get back into this and we should finish this work, or I should at least try to convince him to get on it again. But all of the ether stuff needs to be revisited and needs to be gone through with the rational scientific method and compared to other theories like Walter Russell's theories, and et cetera. Ken Wheeler does a decent job digesting a lot of the Walter Russell stuff and the and the ether stuff. He does a good job. I agree with a lot of stuff that Ken says. I just wish he would make it a little bit more digestible for other people who don't understand, all of his terminology because he tends to do that. Which brilliant people tend to do. But the ether stuff, um, you got to be careful with it, because what are you explaining? You know, here, let me just generally, I got a couple of general things I
And
can.
if Polygonal Construction wants to reach out with me with an email, we can follow up for a discussion or show. Or I'm not, give me some good points to review of your research and work. I know you've supported the show for a long time, and I've seen you in here for a long time, so thank you.
Yeah, and great questions, man. I'd love to talk to you sometime for sure.
Yeah, where did all the trolls go? Suddenly they're laying off tonight. I mean, we must have exposed and cracked too many of them, so now they're like just trying to force my show, keep the numbers as low as possible, because the all the spooks seem to have disappeared the last few weeks. Not sure what happened there.
Good riddance. Careful,
Abel Danger is another one I'd like to have on the show.
yeah, careful. Don't invoke them too much. We don't want them coming out of the woodworks like
Yeah,
they do.
is it possible that Aristotle's wrong laws were inverted with Newton's laws? Very possible. And that's from Losich again.
Losses, yeah. Real quick, while I'm looking for my notes on ether that I'd like to talk about. I would start by saying, check out Flamenco's work about the whole ancient Greece stuff. You'll start to see who these people might have actually been, and it makes way more sense. And yes, I do believe that a lot of their stuff was inverted. At least it was later inverted with editors. I believe many of the old writers that gave us all the stuff about Pythagoras and all these guys. These were actually real medieval characters, in my opinion. I'm telling you, it's not gonna jive with
I
you.
agree with Caleb entirely.
If you go read this stuff yourself, it's gonna make a lot of sense to you. Me just referencing it, of course you're gonna be like, what is he talking about? Like, of course the Greeks, invented this and that. But if you go look, I'd love to get into flamenco at some point. The thing is, just dropping a little bit here and there kind of makes you sound crazy, because it's
So deep.
deep. It's not. It's so different than what you've been taught your whole life, which makes sense. I mean, it's interesting to me how so many people out there will be like, oh, well, there's no way that the conspiracy goes that deep. However, I believe this conspiracy. It's like, why don't you be open to the fact that perhaps everything is wrong, and start there? And if you do that, you begin to realize it's important to teach people how to think, not what to think. Then you realize that's why everything I'm telling you.
Well, I get people that will attack me for mentioning flamenco, but they absolutely refuse under any circumstance to read flamenco. They'll bring up like another researcher, Mazarov, or somebody that flamenco cites, and then they'll say use guilt by association. Then they'll say all 100 books plus that flamenco wrote are wrong because he mentions Mazarov for like a half a chapter in book one or whatever, And it's like just the most absurd, fallacious logic. They don't attack flamenco's work. They just use, this silly guilt by association, and then they poison the well that all of flamenco's work is wrong, and they don't even address how flamenco discusses Mazarov.
Yeah. So the thing if you talk to people about flamenco, and if you've actually read all the work, so many of the people that I've met that actually have somewhat of the people in some groups convinced that flamenco is wrong. Like you'll run across like Reddit feeds and threads and Quoras and all. There's threads about flamenco, and if you really read them, like, because I'm completely open to being wrong, I'd like to know all the arguments against it. I have no dog in the fight in any of it.
Flamenco's wrong because you stupid. That's the sum of their arguments,
So the argument you just got, for example, okay, yeah, he says that N.A. Morozov was wrong about certain things, and that's why flamenco's debunked. Okay, well, if you made it to some of the later books, you would figure out Actually, you know what? Actually, even in the first book, I believe, if you read thoroughly in the first book, Fomenko explains how he has to go through and read and fix and rework Morozov's work. He's not praising Morozov as like, there'd be no need to write his books. The Fomenko wouldn't need to go through massive tomes fixing Morozov's work if that was the case. And you make an argument like that to them back, a counter argument, and they just like, disappear into the trees. Like, it's like time and time again, these arguments that I get, I'm just like, man, you'd think you would want to know the grammar before you jump into an argument publicly and just and start name calling, but
Right.
these people expose themselves from my
Read the Bible before you attack the Bible. That was a hard one for me to learn initially. We all did that before we actually sat down and read it. Whoa, it's all about truth and living in truth. How about that? Especially the New Testament.
Yeah, I'm not going to be a hypocrite, man. I've been wrong about a lot of things. That's how I've gotten where I am. I'm glad that I can learn from my mistakes. I don't take it personally like a lot of people do. If I'm wrong, I celebrate being wrong because that's when I learn.
Right.
So I don't let people tell me
and
logical fallacies.
And somebody told you recently that because Fomenko had admitted he made a few mistakes in a few areas and gone back and corrected them, that therefore all of his work was wrong. No, it's like, it's like all of my early work in psychedelia and ethnobotany and everything. It was all wrong because everybody I was citing in my books, well, not all wrong. One of my books is primary citations mostly, but, you come out and you admit you're wrong. That's how you don't like, you either bury it and pretend, or you man up and you own it and say, yeah, it was wrong, and it's like there's two types of peoples, the liars and deceivers, or those who can humble themselves and just say, yeah, this one was a mistake, but all these points were correct. So, it's really hard for people to grasp living in truth and using the trivium and being able to admit you're wrong and things like that. And so, somebody asked, are all fossils fake or just dinosaur fossils? The issue is like, it's like they'll find like a little fingernail, bone or something of the end of some fossil, and then they'll make a dinosaur of it, and then they'll create the skin and the paint, paint the colors, and they'll create this whole thing, and then they literally reverse engineered the dinosaurs, and then if you get that, like fossil fuels aren't from fossils, it's abiogenic from the volcanic action of the earth and all of this, then you get, oh wait, cars aren't running on dead dinosaurs and dead trees from 5 million years ago. It's like the volcanoes actually producing the oil. And it's like down in Orange County, in the 40s, they capped all of the oil wells down there, and they're all full now.
Yeah, those two shows that you did with the
Greg
with,
Quinones, yeah.
on abiogenic oil was just a huge for me, man. That was just like, oh, and I went down and I did as much of my own research into it, separate avenues, and it all makes perfect sense to me. And I ended up taking a whole bunch of notes and writing half a paper on the dinosaur stuff. And I'd like to get into it at some point. There's a lot there, and I know people should be very skeptical of what we say about dinosaurs, but they should also be skeptical of what the mainstream view is of dinosaurs, and they should do their own research as well.
Leopold made a comment again. That's Gospod Lasic in the comments there, the Croat. It was when I lived in Yugoslavia that the Serbs. You see, when I first started reading, and thank you, and I'll figure out who that was that just donated. When I started reading Fomenko, he kept talking about Tsargrad, and when I lived in Yugoslavia, they would always say, well, Yugoslavia was this huge empire, and our capital was the Kingdom of Serbia was in Istanbul today, and it was called Zarigrad, and I was like, oh geez, and so when I started reading Fomenko, it was just like, oh man, the Serbs tried to teach me this like 25 years ago. You know?
Man, there's actually even little villages of Tartars still left too.
Yeah,
it's crazy, man.
Absolutely.
But
and sorry, just really quick, Jeffrey Nelson says, definitely going to have to rewatch this one. I was initially drawn to Russell's work by his beautiful drawings and illustrations.
So I've got his, as far as I know, at least 90% of his complete collection on my Facebook group for people to download. You know, not my Facebook group, my Facebook page, a Russellian, and I put a whole bunch of links in there as well. I might be able to put all that in a Google Drive to make it better than the Facebook. I don't always like, citing people to that. It can be confusing sometimes. But yeah, the Walter Russell stuff, man. If you get into it, just realize that Russell still had a lot of influence by the mainstream terminologies. So he didn't go through with he was kind of an adept of sort. He wasn't necessarily, he was a polymath for sure. Very smart guy. Got all of his stuff uh, downloaded to him in near death experiences and meditations and all this stuff, and tried to relay it to people the best he could. So some of his lingo isn't there, but I do think that it is very worthwhile to go check out. Don't just look into Ken Wheeler, who talks about his work, or somebody else who talks about his work. Check out it for yourself. He's got great books. I have beef with atomic suicide. Um, I'm not sure about the whole atomic stuff. That's a long
Yeah,
story.
it's looking more and more like the whole nuclear thing may be totally bunk.
I got a lot of good stuff on that. I, I'd be happy to, if anybody's interested in this type of stuff, contact me.
Maybe
We
we
can do
should
this
just
show.
do a part 2 of this. Maybe I'll change the name to Scientific Inversion, and then Methods for Debunking Pseudoscience is the subtitle, and just reverse the title there, and we can turn it into like a series if you want.
We could do that, man. I have like a whole bunch of on our bullet point for the outline. I think I only got through half, so
And then
I
Lasich
still.
says, Jan, look up on YouTube Dr. Miroljub Petrovich. He tries to invert the Tartary stuff in the Balkans.
There's a really interesting stuff from Russian websites and Russian blogs that I've gone and checked out. They're trying real hard to suppress a lot of that information. They make it hard for us to get a lot of the books that they have translated. Um,
Yeah.
they make it very difficult for the Russians themselves. I've heard several times from people who live in Russia that they suppress it all over there as well. They're even in school and stuff. They suppress it as much as they can. I've heard all kinds of stories, but um, I'll tell you, the flamenco stuff is some of my favorite stuff I've ever studied, and I just keep getting more and more epiphanies, and things make more and more sense. And I'd love to talk to more people about it and get more people involved reading it. So many times, I'll just throw this out there, man. One of the things that kind of annoys me just a little bit is, yeah, I'm taking notes about flamenco, and I'm going through all this stuff for me, trying to digest it all. And I plan on making videos eventually, putting out information,
Like Jacob and
notes,
I did.
like you are doing, which is I'm grateful you're doing it, because not a whole lot of people are. I'm planning on doing my part, whatever that is. But come on, guys, like don't always rely on other people to give you the footnotes and stuff. I keep getting questions from people. Hey, man, will you just make bullet points for me? It's like, dude, even if I make a bullet point for you, and these are skeptics, these are people who are hardcore skeptics. They're like, well, tell me some of the main points, like what? So I can tell you some main points so you can sit there and try to debunk the points. And it's like, go read it yourself, get the grammar yourself, then you'll actually have arguments for or against that are based on the grammar, and you won't look like a dick. And hey, you might actually like it, you might learn something from it. I'm always telling people, don't take my advice for it, like check it out. People are like, well, there's like 100 books, and they're
At least
just massive tomes.
read the first, at least read book 1 to get your mind around it. It's such a deep concept, and then once you get it, it's just boom, wow. And then once you can grasp that linear history, or that history is not linear as we've been told, basically I use the analogy, it's like frisbees, okay? You have the Scaligerarian historians in the 14th through 16th century, if that's exactly correct. But what they did is Tartary collapses, and for the next 200 years, they basically rewrite all the books, and they throw them back into history at intervals of 333, 1500, and 1800, or 1050 and 1800 years. And so it's like, they take the names and places of real events and whatnot and people, and then they'll rewrite it and change a little bit and just throw it back into history like frisbees and distribute it back out. And then they point back at their own research, and then nobody was allowed to question Scaliger on anything. He was the most fallacious person that, the quotes that Jacob pulled up regarding him were just, absolutely ridiculous. The guy didn't speak about anything in truth. He didn't support any arguments. Anybody questioned him on anything, he just called him stupid, and that was the end of the discussion, essentially. Not verbatim like that, but, it was just, ridicule and this sort of stuff to avoid whatever questions they brought up. And even Newton, to his credit, and I've not read his book, but Newton even questioned chronology if it was all fake.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, which is all, very interesting, to say the least. Okay, so I guess it's a good idea to have a follow-up to this. Just to get people interested in watching for the next show, I would like to get into what is time. I have a kind of a little, I wrote a note about it a while ago, and it kind of helps me figure out how to think about certain concepts, and time is one of them. I got stuff to say about dimensions, parallel dimensions, how to debunk these things with other people, how to rationalize it in your own thinking, how to weigh it against, these other theories. I got stuff on Tesla versus Einstein, because, I hope people realize that, promoting Einstein and, a lot of his theories, relativity, whatnot, and promoting Tesla is really diametrically opposed. And I hope people realize how ridiculous you sound by promoting both Tesla and Einstein. We could do a whole show on Einstein alone. I'm sure. I think you already touched on a lot of really great points with Holly, and I would only add to that. But there's also Dewey B. Larson and Debunking the Electron. We can get into what is charge, because I believe charge there isn't necessarily like positive and negative. There's actually charge and discharge. And if you think of it like a tire blowing up, and that's kind of charge. And I have a whole list of synonyms that go along with charge and positive and all these words we say. And then negative as a deflating or a decharge. You can't negatively charge a cell phone. Like, you can't plug it into a negative charge. You can only discharge it. That's one example. But we could get into all kinds of cool stuff, like all these specific terminologies that we use in science. I'd like to go through a lot of them and define the terms more, so people can get a more of a understandable idea about what these things that all these scientists talk about, what they really are, not what they say they are, but rationally what they actually are. So I got tons more stuff.
Cool. Well, we're just about at 2 hours here. I think this is probably a good place to stop it for the evening. And the comments in the chat, Uncommon Conspiracies just now shows up. He's usually here. He's like, what did I miss? But, the chat group was probably the best tonight that I've ever seen it. That's really awesome that people are, picking up on all of this stuff and figuring it out. And, thanks everyone for all of the support and donations. We already answered the question about Dullard. And so, go back and listen to the whole show. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody, for participating. I'd love to hear from you. Polygonal Construction, So shoot me an email if you would, if you haven't already. And Abel Danger, I know you listen often. I'd love to get you on sometime if you're out there tonight. Anyway, folks, you have anything you'd like to add there, Caleb?
Oh, I would just say great chat again. I agree. I really enjoyed reading a bunch of the chats. Polygonal construction, just real quick, last second. He says Jonathan MacDeem's channel is reading flamenco. I listened to all of them actually. It's like 100 hours just for him to get through like the first two chapters. I think it was kind of a huge investment, but I just listened to it while I was at the gym. I like his commentary. I've reached out to him. I'd love to talk to him. He hasn't accepted my friend request. I know he listens to the show. He mentioned Jan in one of the readings in
Oh,
a
really?
positive light. Yeah, in a positive light. So he's got like I don't know, part 23 up or something like
I
that.
don't
And
even know who it is, so
it's
excuse
a
me.
guy. He's a guy that he's a Christian who is going through flamenco's stuff, and he gives real good commentary. He's very skeptical as he should be, but he's actually very convinced. He gets convinced. He also has problems with some stuff, but he ends up working through it. It's kind of cool if you have the time.
Yeah, well, I owned book one of Fomenko's first 7 books. I bought book one 13 years ago, and it wasn't until like, a year and a half ago or so that I actually, maybe a year ago, that I sat down and read it, before Jacob and I started doing the series. But it was, yeah, there you go.
I got a bunch
But
of them here, and
I got to page 40 twice, and I stopped at page 40 or 45 twice before I finally worked my way through the book, and then I was completely mind blown. And thanks for
yeah,
the compliments, everybody, today, and thanks for the
I
support. Any other donations, please throw them in. I hope you all threw Caleb some change to help with his research and all this. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say I highly recommend actually getting the hard copies, going through and highlighting this stuff. Like every almost something on every single page is highlighted, and taking really good notes. That way, a lot of people want to
What book
take the
is that?
easy way. Oh, just this is just one of the flamenco books.
No,
I do
no,
it in
I was
all
saying
of
what
them.
number. That's number 2, and which.
This is number two. This is number one. I got three is a really hard read, but it's important, especially for people who are talking about the history of science. It definitely goes into the history of science, which is awesome. But it's a very thick book, number three, and number four has got a lot of. They all have great content. I would just say I would recommend, as opposed to listening to them on audiobook and stuff like that. Like a lot of people are mad that they don't have them in audiobook.
Yeah, how could you even go through it? Because I mean, look at this stuff. How can you grasp these charts in an audiobook? How are you going to grasp how this stuff all breaks down if you're staring at an audiobook? You
I'm
know,
telling you, you'll want to go read it over again if you do. Like you'll get hooked that way, which is great. Like I don't want to discourage people from like getting the grammar, but the charts you won't be able to, take notes, citations, and see where it is. Like every time somebody brings up something, you want to go back and you're like, oh yeah, this person. They talk about a new person from history. You want to go look them up, see where they fit, who were they really. And my favorite thing to do is to go like watch the history documentaries and some of the movies like 300 and like the Sparta, or like watch them. I don't recommend movies for any other purpose other than to
debunking.
to debunk them and look at how they invert it all. And you start to realize this whole Hollywood narrative has been going on for a lot longer than you think.
Why do you
Before
think
they
they call it
invented.
Hollywood, right? It's because
Exactly.
it's the Hollywood is what the sorcerer's wand is made out of. So they're spinning magic and selling lies. So yeah,
Yes, sir.
be careful believing anything out of Hollywood.
Yes, sir.
So, all right, folks, thanks for all your support and donations tonight. And please support the show, everybody. I think Holly and I may be doing Royal Society Part 4 next week, and maybe we can have you on the week after that. And maybe I'll get an email from Polygonal in the meantime.
Cool, great. I'd love to. And yeah, thanks for everything. And I think it was a great show.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Good night, everybody. Take care.
Bye, everyone.